When Heroes Reborn started, there was one book that I never bothered to look at. I bought a few issues of the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and Iron Man, but Captain America? I didn't get a single issue. Captain America never appealed to me when I was younger. He was the stiff, the rule follower. He wasn't any fun, he didn't have a mysterious backstory, he didn't go exploring wacky and strange locales. I mean, he wasn't even a badass. At least Venom and the Punisher had that going for them. It really wasn't until Ed Brubaker's run in the early aughts, and after a lot of growing up, that I started to understand the appeal of Captain America. Cap ultimately stands for personal freedom and for personal responsibility. He fights not to make the world a better place, but to keep us, the people, safe, so that we can build a better world. There are, of course, lots of other themes that run through Captain America, but for me, that's the touchstone. I'm super unfamiliar with pre-Brubaker Cap, so it'll be interesting to see what authors Rob Liefeld and Jeff Loeb have to say with the character during this run. One of the most, let's say, interesting parts of this run is, of course, Rob Liefeld's art. Made famous in the early 90s for his violence-based characters and dynamic art style, Liefeld is both legend and joke in the comic fan community. There are lots of sites and articles dedicated to tearing his art apart, and I'm going to keep that side of this narrative light. I personally am not a Liefeld fan, and while I will comment on the artwork, I'm also not interested on just crapping on the man. His work is not to my tastes, but there are people out there who genuinely like his stuff. I'm mostly here for the story, and that, too, was under Liefeld's purview here, shared with writer Jeff Loeb. How will this pair modernize Captain America for the 1990s? What new twists will they bring to his story? My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 1.3, Captain America Reborn. Heroes Reborn, Captain America launched in November of 1996. Like I said earlier, the book is co-written by Rob Liefeld and Jeff Loeb. John Sybal inked the book, while Brian Haberlin and Extreme Color handled the coloring duties. Like the rest of the Heroes Reborn line, Captain America ran for 13 patriotic issues, but right now, we're just going to focus on issues 1 through 6. We open at the height of World War II, and Captain America is kicking ass. We've got the Pledge of Allegiance over all of this. He's wearing the flag. He's punching Nazis. This is patriotic as hell. But it doesn't last. Steve Rogers wakes up in his bed next to his wife. This isn't the first time he's had this dream, but he can't tell Peggy about it. A part of him knows how dangerous that could be. On his way to work, Steve and a coworker hear a news story about how the World Party has ties to white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups. Steve finds it hard to believe that there'd be Nazis in America, but his friend brushes it off. On the ride, Steve sees a mysterious man and is distracted all day long because of it. At lunch, Steve tells his coworkers about his dream in the vaguest terms possible. His ride excuses himself to make a phone call. That night, Steve dreams of Cap again. In the morning, though, we cross Philadelphia to meet Ricky Barnes. Despite her aspirations to Juilliard, she was shot down. She's angry at the world, but not as much as her brother John. He insinuates that Ricky didn't get in because the spot that should have been hers went to a minority. Ricky doesn't believe that, or that John could be so close-minded. He and his friend, who could give the Hulk a run for his money in a bodybuilding show, like, geez, this guy's huge, have been going to World Party rallies. And, in fact, there's another tonight. Ricky tries to stop them, but John and Gus shove past her. The man behind the fervor sits in an old church. Masterman waxes philosophic about the death and resurrection of the Nazi Party to his second-in-command, Hauptmann. He reports that the old man has been spotted in the city and promises to both kill the man and reclaim the shield. This leaves Masterman, calling himself Alexander the Great, to address his audience. His speech is disturbingly familiar, playing to fears of job loss and replacement by immigrants. One man can't stand it and leaves. Turns out that this guy is Special Agent Hunt for S.H.I.E.L.D., and he's been investigating the World Party. As he heads deeper into the church, Hunt discovers several nukes. He contacts his parent company to report the discovery, but is found and captured. Elsewhere, Steve is out walking to clear his head. He hates lying to his wife, but he's so out of sorts. That's when he meets Abraham Wilson, the mysterious man from earlier in the issue. Abe claims to know the captain, despite Steve having never been on a ship. But Abe claims otherwise and, after dropping Steve's name, finally has his full attention. Abe takes him to a warehouse and explains that he's been carrying it for years, following Steve across the nation. He opens the case and pulls out Captain America's shield. Steve recognizes it immediately as the shield from his dreams. Abe explains how he literally stole it from the government, always with the intention of returning it to Steve. While he does so, the World Party soldiers close in and blow the warehouse up. As the soldiers move in to confirm the kill, Steve bursts out of the rubble and kicks their asses. Once the dust settles, Steve digs Abe out, but it's too late. He dies in Steve's arms. Up in the SHIELD helicarrier, Agents Sharon Carter and Dum Dum Dugan report that the Patriot is awake, with a capital P. And Nick Fury swears that this time, it'll be on their terms. This is where the first issue ends, but it's not really the end of our introduction to either Steve or Captain America. Issue 2 brings Steve home, where he's shown some hard truths. Peggy and Rick, Steve's wife and son, are home, but they're unresponsive to his attempts to talk to them. They just stand there until Nick Fury reactivates them. It turns out that Steve's family are life model decoys, meant to fulfill the illusion that Steve is a normal person. Fury explains that when President Truman informed Cap of his intention to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he disagreed. The president wanted Cap's vocal support, but Steve couldn't give it. So SHIELD used recently acquired German techniques to basically brainwash Steve. SHIELD has been moving him around since then, building a new career and life for him every couple of years. Naturally, Steve isn't happy with this. He's dedicated his life to America, and it's turned its back on him. What exactly does Fury expect from him now? Well, Steve can either go back to sleep or get back to work. Steve agrees to work for Fury, but this time it's going to be on his terms. Fury teleports them both to the helicarrier, and we get formal introductions to Agents Carter and Dugan, who will be helping Steve adjust to S.H.I.E.L.D. He puts on his Captain America uniform, and Nick tells him about an odd group called the Avengers. While Steve is rediscovering himself, Ricky's brother John gets in further with the World Party, cementing her need to save him. Agent Hunt is tortured by the Nazis to no apparent end, but hey, the Red Skull shows up for it because he's a fan, I guess. And Sam Wilson, Air Force pilot, is informed of his father's death. After Abe is buried, Steve visits Sam at the grave in costume to offer his condolences. Sam, however, isn't having it. As far as he's concerned, Cap is the one who killed his father. But before that can go any further, Crossbones shows up and beats the crap out of them both. Ricky, meanwhile, sneaks into the church headquarters of the World Party in the hope of saving her brother. Instead, she gets caught by him, escapes into the arms of the Red Skull, and is then captured. Again! So now all of our heroes are captured. Hooray for intelligent plotting! Speaking of, Cap and Sam are imprisoned in the church. Cap apologizes for getting Sam into this. He didn't mean to. But Sam doesn't care. All his life he heard from his father about how important Captain America was. And not just to him personally or to America, but to the entire world. But here he is, trapped with little wings on his head. Some hero. The Red Skull shows up, wearing Cap's shield, and does his best to win Steve over. The America that the Captain once defended died long ago, another lost ideal to the sands of time. And Cap is white, fit, has blue eyes. Hell, I bet under that mask he's blonde. The perfect Aryan Ubermensch. He should join the Skull. It's his destiny. Steve refuses. The Skull's 6 crossbones on him, and this time, Cap handles him readily. Cap takes back his shield, freeing himself and Sam from their shackles. Sam reintroduces himself as Falcon to his friends, which now include Captain America, because turning down the Skull proved what an awesome guy he is, I guess. But then Masterman shows up. He intends to kill them all, including the Red Skull, but he starts with Sam, shooting him several times in the chest. Seizing this opportunity, the Skull somehow gets past Masterman and escapes. Cap takes down all of the Nazis, plus Masterman, and then turns to Sam. Desperate to save him, Cap cuts open his hand and has Sam drink some of his blood, hoping that the super soldier serum in it will keep him alive. The Skull knocks Hauptmann out for some reason and makes good his final escape. Ricky, during all of this, has been reasoning with her brother as she's tied to a nuke. She had nearly won John and Gus over, too, when Masterman arrives. He's set to launch the nukes, but Cap shows up, frees Ricky, and they almost succeed in getting the launch device from him. Ricky fumbles the device, though, right to his feet. When Sam shows up, together they finish off Masterman. Fury and the rest of S.H.I.E.L.D. finally show up to do the cleanup work. The Skull got away, but that just means that the job isn't done. Today, though, they won, and Cap enjoys the feeling. Where do I begin? Where can I begin? Okay, you know what? Let's start with the art and just get this out of the way. Because here's the thing. This isn't good art, but I've seen worse. Yeah, it has all the Liefeld classics. Clenched teeth, open mouths, ridiculous proportion, tons of tiny lines everywhere. But the action scenes have impact, and Andy Troy's colors go a long way to making this book look good. A good colorist often goes unnoticed in a comic, but here the colors really stand out. I would go so far as to say that the colors save the art side of this book, but there is a lot of weird art in this. Like how Abe Wilson doesn't have eyes, just these dark pits, or that he's literally half the size of Steve, or Dum Dum's sudden shift from rotund to ripped from issue to issue, or how the Skull's head in a panel of issue 4 when compared to Cap's head. Like I said, it's Liefeld. Either you know to stay away from this stuff, or you're a fan. As someone who doesn't like his work in general, I have to say that this did look better than I was expecting. Okay, enough picking on the artwork. I like the new logic behind Steve's missing time. Rather than being frozen in ice for 50 years, Steve's been brainwashed the whole time. There's this potential for tons of backstory here that I'm going to guess we never get to see, but think of it. How did S.H.I.E.L.D. mind wipe Steve to begin with? I mean, I bet that was a fight. Maybe there were times when they needed Cap over the years, so they brought him out only to need to tragically mind wipe him again. I know that Ed Brubaker touched upon the 70s Cap, I think it was 70s Cap, during his run on the book, so this would be an interesting way of exploring that idea. What if the conditioning failed before, as it's starting to do at the beginning of this story, and Steve went rogue? There are plenty of cool stories that could be dropped into this period of missing time. That's perhaps the only real downside to this idea. We never get a follow-up. None of those neat ideas will get explored. I mean, we're almost halfway through the book at this point, and what idea is there is barely touched upon. So Steve is remembering his past, but he hasn't 100% remembered it yet. So this Steve Rogers isn't super experienced in the field, soldier of World War II Steve. This is family man living in Philly Steve that we're reading about. This guy shouldn't be comfortable wearing a flag and fighting terrorists. He should be scared, but willing to fight anyway, and inexperienced and angry about what his government did to him. Maybe he is willing to be the bigger man and put his anger aside for the greater good of America, and it would be awesome if he did that, but he never says it. Maybe he's even so angry that he plans to get revenge on Fury, or is at least willing to act on his own without the government's purview moving forward. I mean, let's see leashed Steve versus how free he wants to be. I was really surprised at Steve having a family when I first opened up the comic and was pretty disappointed to learn that they were just LMDs. Steve as a family man is something rarely touched upon, so giving him that added responsibility and humanity was interesting. Losing that could even have been interesting, but we don't get any emotional follow-up to these revelations. You'd think that there would have been more sadness or anger after the idea of his wife and child being killed. And that raises a ton of questions, some of which I don't want to ask. Steve and Peggy have a pretty happy relationship, so how did the sex work? Does S.H.I.E.L.D. build its LMDs with special operations in mind? I mean, I'd believe it if they did, it's just a little gross to think about. When Rick had parent-teacher nights at school, did S.H.I.E.L.D. pay a teacher to interact with Steve? Did they set up a staging school for one night only? Was there someone at S.H.I.E.L.D. whose whole job was to manage Steve's various lives and keep him happy, like Truman Show style? I like to think so. Was there footage of Steve and Peggy's marriage, or was that fake too? Or maybe it just didn't exist, it was only present in Steve's memories. Man, I could do this forever. For a book that stretches its story out over the first 5 issues, the pacing here is really butchered. Plot lines are dropped in with no payoff, and I'm looking at you, Special Agent Hunt, and the quick mention of the Avengers. When we go to the cemetery for the burial of Abe Wilson, there's no setup or narration box. Plus, there's only been maybe one night between Abe revealing himself to Steve and then this particular scene. So, Abe's body was found amidst the wreckage and taken for funeral processing. Sam was informed on his aircraft carrier. He left the carrier, made it to a base somewhere, I'm assuming in Philly since that's where all of this takes place, changed, and then watched his father get buried all in one night? And Abe had a prepared tombstone? Don't those things take time? I get the feeling that this kind of timey-wimey bullcrap would have happened a lot more if I followed the day-to-night cycle of the book more closely, but I didn't, because really that's a rabbit hole I'm never going to be satisfied with. I like the inclusions of Ricky Barnes and Sam Wilson, especially where Steve should be at mentally. Here's a guy who is both super patriotic, but has issues with how his government treated him. Well, on the other hand, you have Sam Wilson, currently serving in the U.S. military. So he's probably going to be the work with the government, you'll get through this kind of guy. And on the other hand, we've got Ricky Barnes, a young idealist who will probably chafe under government control and play more towards Steve's reckless side. I love that balance in the characters. I also like that Ricky gets to play the role of the normal person in this story. The base undertones of this narrative are the appeal of the World Party's dogma. So someone needs to be affected by them in order to show how bad they are. That person is Ricky, who almost loses her brother to the narrow-minded hate. I like that she gets into this not to stop the World Party, but just to save her dumb brother. And she nearly succeeds, too. Through the time-honored tradition of being an annoying sibling. What are the odds? So yeah, that story is a bit ham-fisted, but I think it's ham-fisted in a good way. I have some mixed feelings with Falcon. On the one hand, I like Sam as an Air Force pilot, especially one with an axe to grind. He's going to have problems working with Steve, potentially questioning Steve's actions or their role in the greater scheme of things. That's always been the Falcon's role in Steve's life to some degree. Classically, Steve listens to the government while the Falcon questions if that's the right thing to do. Given that this Falcon still works for the government, I doubt we'll see that side of him highlighted, but instead, he'll be the one questioning Steve, forcing him to grow into the hero he's supposed to be. The thing that I really don't like is Steve feeding him his blood. First off, that's not how the super soldier serum works. If it did, S.H.I.E.L.D. would have just taken Steve's blood at regular intervals, wiped his memory of it, and created an army of hyped-up soldiers. 2, Steve's blood is shown to be radioactive green, which is gross. And 3rd, drinking blood to gain powers is always a distasteful idea tied up in supernatural, pagan, or satanic rituals. To a traditional Western audience, and especially to me, that's pretty disturbing. The villains are as one-note as they can be, and their plans are pretty non-existent. Masterman appears to be fighting for political power, hence the World Party. But honestly, he'd do a better job just putting on a suit and getting in front of a TV camera than standing around in a church in battle armor. And if he's trying to take over America from the inside, why does he have nukes? And why is the Red Skull here? Traditionally, the Masterman is a lackey of the Skull, not capable of independent thought, really. It would be the Skull in disguise up there on stage preaching fear and hate, while Masterman acts as his bodyguard and enforcer. But the Skull has no role here, he just walks around and says evil stuff. And the first chance that Masterman can, he betrays the Skull for leadership of the party. So did the Skull want Masterman to win the White House? Or the government seat, or whatever the hell he was running for? Was he even running? Was he just stirring up crowds of unrest? I don't know. I have no idea. I've read these issues multiple times to do this review, and I have no clue what the goal here was. I'm assuming that the goal was to nuke the US, or at least the White House, but if so, why wait? They had the nukes at the start of the story. It's right there in the first issue. Just nuke the place. And then we've got Crossbones, who doesn't speak at all. When he's first introduced, Masterman asks the Skull if he's worried about the Captain's return. The Skull says no, and that's why I've hired a powerful outsider to stop him. That means that he's a threat. He's such a threat that you went outside your own organization and hired a powerful outsider to take care of him. If he wasn't a threat, you wouldn't have bothered. And I'd like to note that if the Skull didn't have Sam and Cap kidnapped, they would never have found out about the church and thus been able to stop him. There is no groundwork for S.H.I.E.L.D. knowing where the skull is. There was no report back. Agent Hunt got captured and tortured before he was able to contact S.H.I.E.L.D., so they're flying 100% blind. Oh, and the fight where Crossbones takes down Cap? There's no reason for why he's able to do it. Captain America has enhanced strength and reflexes. Crossbones is a regular dude, but he somehow manages to outpunch Cap. The only reason he beats Cap is because the plot needed him beaten, not because Crossbones had a strategy, or more combat skills, or better weapons. And then, when Cap beats him later in the book, it's the same situation. There's no reason that Captain America wins, it's just the way it had to be. That's stupid. That's bad storytelling. And in a book with bad art, bad storytelling doesn't flippin' help. But, despite all of this mess, I enjoyed reading the book. I don't know how this happened, but the flaws in the book didn't become apparent until I sat down to gather my thoughts, and then one by one they started to show themselves. If I had been reading this book on a month-to-month basis, like when it first came out, I probably would have noticed immediately and burned them all. But in the all-in-one sitting style that I did for this podcast, God in heaven, it worked to its benefit. Things happened so quickly that I didn't have time to question whether it was smart or not. That's Captain America. Between the Fantastic Four and this book, Fantastic Four wins hands down. It looks better, it reads better, it makes more sense, and intellectually, I want to crap all over this Captain America book. But emotionally, for the most part, it worked. I'm not saying that this is one of the best Cap books I've ever read. Nah, son, that ain't happening. But this is readable. If Fantastic Four is a 4 out of 5 stars, then Cap's a 2 out of 5. I've read worse, but I've also read much better. But wait, Ben, you said that this episode was going to cover issues 1 through 6. That was just 1 through 5. What kind of liar are you? And yeah, you got me. I read issue 6, which also happens to be the last issue that Rob Liefeld wrote/drew as well. And I'm super tempted to add it onto this. After all, that would break down nicely, wouldn't it? Get all of the Liefeld out in one shot, finish up all of his story elements, and move on to the next arc. But having read issue 6, it features some large-scale implications for the entire Heroes Reborn line. Implications that I don't want to get into here at the start of the universe. It's the kind of thing that changes the game, and given that issues 6 through 12 need to close out the arc, I feel it's more appropriate to place issue 6 with that run. Don't worry, issue 6 is super light on details otherwise, so adding it on to the next Cap episode shouldn't add a lot of extra time. I feel like it'll be better though, so we'll wrap this up then. There's only one other solo book in the Heroes Reborn lineup, and it's up next. Iron Man. We get to learn the tragic reasons behind Tony Stark's self-centered lifestyle, Hydra enters the Heroes Reborn universe, and we get a bonus hero. Prepare yourself for the Savage Hulk. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.